Okay, well, thank you, Erin, for recording. You might laugh, but I'm recording for Judy Little. Judy, many of you know Judy, but some of you didn't have the opportunity to meet Judy. Judy was our lead mentor mom for many years, and her husband Dave were a big part of MOPS. Dave was in the MOPS area, rocking and cuddling and playing with your kids while Judy was in here with us. And so I believe this is about my 6th year of being a mentor mom, and every year Judy would come to me and say, "Could you do a devotional, Marcia?" And I'd say, "Oh, sorry, I'll make coffee, I'll do anything, but not a devotional. That just isn't my thing." So anyway, I just wanted to record it so that I can send it to Judy. If I make it through, I'll send it to her. And so we'll see. So thank you, Erin, for recording. And the reason why I'm up here now is because at our steering team meeting in the summer, Jen very strategically put the schedule in front of me of being a devotional reader, and I said, I started to say, "Oh," and she said, "Come on, Marcia," she said, if Lisa can be a speaker, and she explained to me, she said, "This particular Wednesday," and she pointed, she goes, "It's the Wednesday Lisa's going to be a speaker, and all you need to do is say a quick devotional and introduce her, and so if your daughter can do it, then you should be." Right. So anyway, so here you go, Judy. So first of all, I want to read one of my most favorite stories, and it was one I've had in my notes for a few years, and just yesterday I started thinking, oh my gosh, I think maybe one of you read this story a few years ago. And if so, sorry, it's going to be a repeat, but you'll understand why, because it's just a great way to introduce Lisa. So I'm going to read it. So it's called Growing Roots by Philip Gulley. Had an old neighbor when I was growing up named Dr. Gibbs. He didn't look like any doctor I'd ever known. Every time I saw him, he was wearing denim overalls and a straw hat. He smiled a lot, a smile that matched his hat, old and crinkly and well-worn. When Dr. Gibbs wasn't saving lives, he was planting trees. His house sat on 10 acres, and his life goal was to make it a forest. The good doctor had some interesting theories concerning plant husbandry. He came from the no pain, no gain school of horticulture. He never watered his new trees, which flew in the face of conventional wisdom. He said that watering plants spoiled them, and that if you water them, each successive tree generation will grow weaker and weaker. So you have to make things rough for them and weed out the weeny trees early on. He talked about how watering trees made for shallow roots, and how trees that weren't watered had to grow deep roots in search of moisture. I took him to mean that deep roots were to be treasured. So he never watered his trees. He'd plant an oak. Instead of watering it every morning, he'd beat it with a rolled up newspaper. I asked him why he did that, and he said it was to get the tree's attention. Dr. Gibbs went to glory a couple years after I left home. Every now and again, I walk by his house and look at the trees that I'd watched him plant some 25 years ago. They're granite strong now, big and robust. Those trees wake up in the morning and beat their chests and drink their coffee black. I planted a couple trees a few years back, carried water to them for a solid summer, sprayed them, prayed over them, the whole 9 yards. 2 years of coddling has resulted in trees that expect to be weighted on hand and foot. Whenever a cold wind blows, they tremble and chatter their branches. Sissy trees. Funny thing about those trees of Dr. Gibbs, adversity and deprivation benefit them in ways comfort and ease never could. Every night before I go to bed, I go to check on my 2 sons. I stand over them, watch their little bodies, the rising and falling of life within. I often pray for them. Mostly I pray that their lives will be easy. Lord, spare them from hardship. But lately, I've been thinking that it's time to change my prayer. has to do with the inevitable cold winds that hit us at the core. I know my children are going to encounter hardship, and my praying they won't is naive. There's always a cold wind blowing somewhere. So I'm changing my prayer, because life is tough whether we want it to be or not. Instead, I'm going to pray that my son's roots grow deep so they can draw strength from the hidden sources of the eternal God. Too many times we pray for ease, but that's a prayer seldom met. What we need to do is pray for roots that reach deep into the eternal, so when the rains fall and the winds blow, we won't be swept asunder. So, I've had the pleasure of being a mentor mom through the years for many of you, and gosh, we've been through a lot. Not only have you all prayed for our family, Lisa, and all of that, but we've prayed for sleep deprivation for all of you, terrible 2s, 3s, 4s, potty training, sibling rivalry, sick children, sick parents, strife between husbands and wives. And it brings back memories for me. We had many joys in our family. I mean, I couldn't even begin to count them. But we also had strife. And I'd like to say that Aaron and Lisa were the perfect little children, and everything was always calm in our house. But that isn't what happened. We had strife. We had strife. Our family has been through a lot. Sickness, divorce, death. But I have to agree with Philip Gulley. Through the storms, my daughters, and hopefully myself, have grown deep roots, and we have learned to draw strength from our eternal God. This is a perfect story to introduce you to Lisa. She has not wasted one storm, and she has been through a lot. The storms, God's been using those storms to prepare her in powerful ways and using her in powerful ways. Through it all, she has grown into an amazing daughter, wife, a mother, a sister, and friend to all, friend to many. I am very proud to introduce you to my daughter, Lisa.
Thank you for coming. We were going to introduce you, but your mom did a beautiful job.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I want to thank my mom and the leaders here at MOPS for inviting me to speak today. I was a part of a MOPS group a long time ago, about 12 years ago, when my oldest daughter was a baby. And I have really fond memories of that time, of just the food and the friendship and the fun that we had, just supporting each other. And I can remember various speakers coming to speak at MOPS, and they spoke about things that they loved, like scrapbooking and scheduling and safety, healthy cooking. I learned so much just at a time when I really needed it. But the speaker I remember the best was a woman who came to speak about her first husband dying and leaving her with her small children when they were very little. And she shared about the trials that her and her family went through. And she shared about the God she loved, pulling her and her family through that trial. Her story drew us all in. And when I saw your theme for the year, Free Indeed, and then the subtitle, Let Love Be the Loudest Voice, I knew what God wanted me to share. He wanted me to share about how he has helped me to get back to my first love. So in Revelations chapter 2, verse 4, it says, the Bible tells us, Nevertheless, I have this against you, that you have left your first love. I'm so guilty of saying things like, I love Oreos, or I love cats. Or my kids would say, they hear me say, I love Butterfingers. But those are not my first love. So before I go any further, I would like to pray. Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity to come and share what you have done in my life. Thank you for each of these beautiful women here and their heart for you and their heart for their children and their families, Lord. I want to pray specifically, though, for the family I just heard about today that's hurting so badly, the foster family dealing with loss. And as you know, it's National Adoption Month, and My heart just goes out to all of those hurting children that are waiting for families or that are already in families, Lord, that are just hurting and need a special touch from you, Lord, a special healing and a filling and a reminder that they are no longer orphans. They never were, because you are their Father. And I just pray that our hearts and our minds would be open to you today. We pray this in your name. Amen. Okay, so the verse I'm focusing on is 1 John 4:18. It says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Because fear involves torment, but he who fears has not been made perfect in love." So for years, I read that 1 John 4:18 verse, and I felt condemnation. Doesn't make sense, but that's what I felt. I so badly wanted relief from fear, to stop the train wreck of thoughts that hijacked my peace, the endless, uncontrolled thoughts that ran wild. What if type thoughts, hopeless thoughts, irrational thoughts. So when I finally came across 1 John 4:18, I saw it as an answer to my problem of fear. But the problem was, I didn't seek wisdom through studying the verse with God's heart. I didn't ask the Holy Spirit to reveal to me the true meaning of the verse. As a result, Satan took and twisted the verse so that I saw it through my own lens. For years, I read the verse as saying I had fear because I didn't love God enough. If only I had perfect love for God, then my fear would be cast out. I so wanted my fear cast out. I so longed to be free from the crippling weight of my fear. The problem was my interpretation of God's answer to fear relied solely on me. I needed to love God better. I needed to muster up the kind of love he was seeking from me. But how? How could I love God perfectly? Well, when trying to love in my own strength, the only way was through performance. So I worked really hard to love God. My actions and attempts at loving God included teaching Sunday school, taking care of my kids, giving them lots of opportunities, striving to keep a clean house, cooking healthy meals, basically pouring my all into my family. None of those are bad things, but it was my heart that was wrong. My purpose was to work for God's love. I did pray. I had to pray. I failed so often to love that I was regularly asking God to forgive me. Nights of crying in my bed, God, I'm so sorry I didn't love my family well today. I'm sorry I blew up in anger again today. I'm sorry I just couldn't keep it all together again today. So collapsing into exhaustion, I'd sleep just to wake again the next day and repeat the same pattern all over again. My own total misconception of God, the role he wanted me to play, and many out of my control situations kept me in this cycle of keeping me the focal point, try hard, fail, keep me the focal point, try harder, fail harder, repeat. Kathy Dickinson, the author of Taming the Giants, writes, "It is understanding that God is concerned about your life and that he loves you very much. His love is perfect, and his one goal is to keep you from being afraid by giving you a sound mind." 2 Timothy 1:7 states, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." So it was fear that was motivating and fueling this cycle I was in, fear of losing control. When you are certain you are holding it all together, fear is a natural response. You know your shortcomings and failures. You know your weaknesses. You know your own inability to keep control over situations. In my life and in the life of my family, there seemed to be one situation after another which I just could not control. An unpredictable home life as a kid with eventual divorce of my parents, a body with a chronic, ultra-rare, life-threatening disease too risky to get pregnant, failed adoption possibilities early on, children who are drug and alcohol affected with unpredictable behavior, fluctuating blood test results indicating continued disease activity, multiple surgeries and illnesses, and a melanoma diagnosis 2 times. We each have our ongoing lists of circumstances, people, or relationships which are out of our control. I know my list may be unique to me, but we each have our lists. Yours may include deaths, illnesses, divorces, unemployment, unjust treatment, or addiction. Whatever your list includes, it's real, it's hard, it's able to knock you off your feet, and it's out of your control. Not understanding God and his love for me, a wrong understanding of the power I thought I held, along with a deep fear of losing control of already out of control situations, led to depression, anger, anxiety, worry, fear, discouragement, and a constant barrage of guilt. For years, I seemed to be in a holding pattern. I didn't stray, I didn't turn my back on the Lord, I didn't fully give myself to my selfish heart, but there was no fruit coming from my life. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31 states, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not grow faint." But I wasn't running my race, and I definitely was not soaring like the eagles. I was simply walking. If you are walking today, just getting by, remaining faithful to the Lord, but just kind of getting by, feeling like you're stuck in thick, sticky mud, almost stuck, but not quite, I will have you know that the Lord sees you. He loves you. He knows your heart to run and even to soar. Listen to what Jeremiah says in Lamentations 3. I believe this is the Lord's message to you and to me, the one who is walking. "I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." And that's Lamentations chapter 3, 19 to 26. I knew the Lord didn't want me to walk forever. You know how people say when God closes a door, he opens another door for you? Well, I was waiting for that next door to open. I believe we all have times of waiting, just as we all have times of walking rather than soaring. I was waiting with a chronic illness that was gradually getting worse. But as I was waiting, I was not growing. I was in the hallway between the two doors, one closed behind me and one so far ahead I couldn't even see it. I read about people of great faith in the Bible who also had time in the hallway. Joseph in prison, Paul in prison, and Jesus' 40 days of fasting and praying. Joseph in prison knew the Lord was with him. He didn't spend time in bitterness. Instead, he sought the Lord in what he had for him. Paul in prison continued to rely on and trust in the Lord's love and plans. He shared the gospel at every opportunity, even while his enemies had him stuck. And Jesus in the garden was in constant communication with the Father, seeking wisdom and comfort, being built up for his upcoming trial. But me? I remained in the hallway, caught in the sin of making myself God in my own life. Many of my fears ran rampant because I was still seeing myself as the one in control. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 reads, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders, and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." I had this constant sense that God wanted me to run. It was a constant underlying awareness that I was still walking, and God had more for me. This is when God used my chronic health condition, AHUS, or atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome, to show me his power, love, and sovereignty, and that the power and control I thought I held over my life were really only hindering me from running and soaring. I spent the better part of 2 years between 2013 and 2015 at doctor's appointments, having multiple tests, biopsies, and procedures done to prepare for a kidney transplant. Part of the process involved finding a living donor, someone with the same blood type as me, and was in generally good health and willing to undergo major surgery and live the rest of their life with one kidney. This required me to lay down some pride, admit to my friends and family that I wasn't well. I couldn't do this on my own, and I needed help. I believe this was the beginning of me letting go, even just a little bit, and allowing God to have his way. I was like a walker wanting to become a runner. I had just added my first short running interval to my training. Don't get me wrong though, I was still a walker. Still, whenever I was alone, driving to another doctor's appointment, I was riddled with fear about having a transplant. The big fear was, would my body reject the new kidney? But other smaller details were piling up, causing fear, trembling, and anxiety. The bulk of these fears centered around my kids. My unique, wonderfully created, high-energy, routine-seeking, structure-needing children. How would they cope? How would our family cope? How would our family get through my recovery? You see, I was still seeing myself as the one holding it all together. The truth of Colossians 1:17, which says, "He is before all things, and in him all things hold together," had not yet made its way to my heart. Now, somewhere around 2005, so back up 10 years or so, about 10 years before my kidneys really started to decline, I was diagnosed with melanoma skin cancer. It was caught early, removed, and no further treatment was needed. But because of this, I needed to have a skin check every year. So a few months before my scheduled kidney transplant, I went for my yearly skin check. The doctor didn't see any concerning moles. We were just about to wrap up the appointment when I remembered a new mole on my foot. You see, the doctor had forgotten to ask me to remove my socks, and I had also forgotten about the suspicious mole until the very end of the appointment. But this was God's providence. When the doctor saw it, he said it needed to be biopsied. A few days later, the call came. Melanoma again. This time, because of the location, they could not stitch it up. They would be removing a fairly large chunk of skin from my foot to ensure getting all of the cancer. But I would be left with an open wound, no stitches. I had to call the transplant clinic to let them know what was going on. They said as long as the wound was healed by January, I would still have the transplant as scheduled. But the wound on my foot took a very long time to heal. Due to my low kidney function and thus my body's inability to get rid of toxins, my skin is incredibly sensitive. So the typical way to cover and treat an open wound only caused a terrible reaction of swelling and blisters all over my foot. As you might imagine, this slowed the healing process, but still by God's mercy, the dermatologist cleared me and said the wound was healed well enough for the transplant to continue as scheduled. This was another confirmation that I should continue as planned with the transplant. I even experienced a miracle healing during that time period. Prior to my foot being deemed healed, I could not place my entire foot down when walking without a lot of pain. At our Christmas Eve service at church, the pastor spoke of healing, and we were singing about Jesus breaking every chain. I felt the Lord say to me, "It's healed." I was standing at the time, so I shifted all my weight back and forth so that I was standing firmly on both feet, something I hadn't done in almost 2 months. Miraculously, no pain. I had experienced a miracle healing, yet still I had so much to surrender. Continuing on with the final preparations before my transplant, there was still underlying fear, but I was beginning to have moments of peace and rest. This was new and hard to explain with my upcoming major surgery. But God still had plans to bring me into further freedom. His next lesson came in the form of a phone call. 1 week before my scheduled transplant, the kidney specialist from the transplant clinic called me to tell me they had looked at the pathology report from my melanoma surgery and found that the cancer was deeper than they originally thought. The good news was they did get it all, but the bad news was that the transplant needed to be postponed at least 2 years to ensure I was cancer-free prior to going on the immunosuppressant medications I would be on for life. In the midst of this call, I was speechless, like someone had just punched me in the stomach and knocked the wind out of me. The answer to my limited diet, ever-decreasing energy, high blood pressure, and being able to avoid dialysis was getting a new kidney. I was left reeling. My daughter's response was, "But Mom, you are always so tired. You need this." The first day was filled with complete shock. The second day, after this change in plans, was filled with, "What are you going to do now, God?" This change in plans was clearly not human planned. Every doctor I was in contact with, which was about 4 at the time, all agreed that the transplant was the next step. But God, how many good stories do we all know that continue on with those beautiful words, but God? I had this strange, unfamiliar feeling. I felt like I should be afraid. I should be in a panic. I should be frantically wondering what was going to happen. But instead, I was experiencing a knowing that God was in control. You see, he always had been, but I had been so focused on me and what I could do about my situation that it required God to swoop in and show himself all powerful, all sovereign, almighty, for me to finally understand his greatness. All the worry and what ifs were gone. Wondering, what if I made a wrong decision? What if I failed? What if my husband or my daughters failed? No longer did these thoughts consume me, because if the all-sovereign God can, with one phone call, change all the plans of many men accordance with his will, what did I have to worry about? The cancellation of my kidney transplant surprisingly left me with the knowledge that my God was in control. My God was holding me. My God loved me. Finally, the 1 John 4:18 verse had made its way to my heart. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment, but he who fears has not been made perfect in love. No fear in love. No fear in love. No fear in love. My God had shown me his deep love for me through his power. I was finally resting in the knowledge that he is my father and I am his daughter. When you are the daughter of the Almighty, what do you have to fear? In his book, Goliath Must Fall, Louis Giglio clears up our thinking and understanding of the story of David and Goliath. Typically, we read that story or have it taught to us in such a way that makes us believe that we are David. We can fight our giants of fear, anxiety, and need for control. All David needed was a sling and a stone. So we see we don't need anything fancy to fight our giants. But in the story of David and Goliath, we are not David. Jesus is David. Jesus fights our giants. In fact, Jesus fought our giants when he became our perfect sacrifice, dying on the cross. That day, as Jesus, perfect Son of God, took his final breath, your giants came crashing down, no longer holding the power to defeat you. Jesus fights for you. 2 Chronicles 32, verse 8 says, with him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God, to help us and to fight our battles. Joshua chapter 23, verse 9 through 10 says, the Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day, no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000 because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised. In Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 22 says, do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God himself will fight for you. In my preparation for this message, the Lord kept bringing me back to certain truths, and I want to share these with you. These are the 3 R's on your notes if you, I don't know if you have
Pass
the
them
notes.
out. We should pass them out. They're,
Oh, okay.
They're right underneath,
Oh,
right
right.
here.
Oh,
Sorry,
That's
I was
okay.
just waiting to,
that's okay.
that's okay, we'll pass these out.
Okay, well, they're easy to remember, so these are the 3 R's on your notes that you'll see a spot to fill in. So the first R is to remember. Remember our faithful Creator. Remember what the Lord has done for you in the past. Write it in a journal. Tell your family. Make a list. Do whatever it takes to remember his faithfulness. So the first R is remember. The second R is reject. Reject lies. The enemy throws lies at us all day long. But if you saturate yourself in the Lord's truth every day, you can recognize the enemy's fear-filled lies and you can reject them. So on your notes also you'll see there's a part, I think maybe it's on the back. The Ephesians assignment, that's not to do today, but maybe like, or not right now anyway, maybe nap time or when the kids go to bed or something. That is going to help you reject those lies. So you will be so blessed if you do that, I promise you. The third R is rejoice. Offer rejoicing with praise and thanksgiving to the Lord. Think about, write about, and talk about what you are thankful for. So the third R is rejoice. Rejoicing with gratitude will keep fear away. So we have remember our faithful Creator, reject lies, and rejoice. So as moms, teaching, leading, and loving our children, we need to seek rest. And rest in God as He fights our battles for us. I lived so long in an exhausting cycle, and maybe some of you are in that exhausting cycle of fear and trying to control people and situations. It wasn't until the Lord revealed His power to me in a way I couldn't deny that I could realize my attempts to control and knock out fear were only futile. I finally saw that I was making myself God in my own life. I believe there are things God is calling us to which will allow us to step down from our self-created thrones, allow God His rightful place, and thus kick fear to the curb. I believe He's calling us to remember, reject lies, and rejoice. Thank you.
Thank you.